All right, thanks. Today I want to talk about some analysis that I did using IFTDIS, the Interagency Fuels Treatment Decision Support System, to support some planned fuel breaks on the Monterey Ranger District. They were really looking at placing a set of fuel breaks around the perimeter of the Ventana Wilderness on the Monterey District. Um, the fuel breaks, they've got four basic criteria. They want to be able to increase the efficiency of fire suppression, and that actually also means provide alternatives for fire suppression in keeping, they want fire within the Ventana Wilderness, but they want to keep it out of the surrounding communities, so reduce the wildfire risk. And then the last two are not investigated exactly in this analysis I did, but could be, the work I did could be used to support their further analysis of looking at reducing wildfire suppression costs and reducing the adverse fire suppression impacts. And the real objective for the Monterey Ranger District was to identify the potential for large fires to occur, look at whether or not those fuel breaks were strategically located and would be encountered by wildfire, and then whether or not, in conjunction with fire suppression activities, they could mitigate fire movement out of the wilderness and into the surrounding WUI. These are areas that have been used before for backburning operations or as creating fire breaks, so creating fire line, but bulldozed line, because this is really steep, deeply dissected country. They want them to be maintained. They go through and they restore them, then they grow back, and then when they get another fire, they have to go through and bulldoze them. And what they want to do is maintain them in as natural a form as they want, but predominantly grass and forbs, that they can go out, like say a fire-threatening one, they can go out quickly, go through, burn off the top of the ridge top, and then use that black to then conduct other either more extensive backburning operations or in conjunction with dropping retardant or something along those lines. So removing the brush and the heavy fuels and really considering them as staging points that you can then go along and either construct additional line or use some of the other tactics that I mentioned. These fuel breaks, sometimes are connected, as these show here on the landscape, and I'm kind of trying to show, that they're, you can see where there's existing line or where they've been burnt out from before down into these valleys. So they're really designing these to be used in conjunction with a basic network of ideas on these different ridge tops that have been used over and over again based on interviews with fire suppression specialists to mitigate fire movement. Every one of the lines that they're proposing, or the fuel breaks that they're proposing, have either apparently been used as burnout lines, like is shown here on the Kirk Fire Complex, or were burnt over by the fire. And in interviewing the people, they said, well, many times they were going to use that line as a fuel break or that ridge top as a fuel break and burn out from it, but they couldn't get there in time. The fire had, by the time they'd gotten everything put together and got out and got ready to establish the break, it had already burned over. And if they had them in position beforehand, they would be able to get in and get set up and backburn. And there is a lot of evidence here, multiple lines of evidence that are showing that these communities are in areas that, given the right conditions, have a high potential to burn. And so, kind of just to reiterate what I've said, and then I'm going to drop in a little closer and look at some specific things. We were really interested in identifying the likelihood that the fuel breaks will be encountered and whether or not they would be able to help suppress fire movement. And they are in locations that have historically been burned by the wildfires. They can potentially lower flame lengths, and we'll look at some of those. And I have a lot of data that I didn't show with fuel breaks and without, showing these different moisture scenarios and how things change. And then I'll show some of these things here where, like the lowered flame lengths and decreased rates of spread can provide the firefighters with alternatives. And my basic conclusion is that the best use of these fuel breaks is for anchor points to do additional fire suppression activities. And that's really what they're proposing them for. And that was what the question they were asking me is could I model that? Just to reiterate, we did see that there's multiple lines that the strategically placed fuel breaks are in the right places. They have been used for backburning operations before, and that collaborates what there's fire fuel suppression specialists and firefighters have been out there for 20 years that told me that. But this collaborates what you get from the field. And when we go in and start looking, here's an area near Big Sur, and this is where they're proposing to build them. They probably won't be quite as wide as the polygon set that they gave me to use, so you gotta use that with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I modeled this as if they were burning off that ridge top, and I used the polygon as the ridge top, and then made that all unburnable. But here's what the model suggests under a 70-degree wind scenario, where fire would move across that landscape. This interruption in the fire movement is Highway 1. It's without spotting, showing it move across the landscape pretty rapidly, and not much obstruction to get from these ignition points all the way to the coast. When you apply, so then I modeled the fuel break, and then I reran the model with the fuel break in there. You can see that here the model is in this simulation space. The fuel breaks are stopping the major flow paths, so reducing the fire. Yeah, when we do put those in, they can be useful. The ones that are going to be maintained can then be useful. But here's when I turned on the spotting. So just using that line, just burning out the top of that ridge top, or modeling at the top of the ridge top. I get excited like I actually went out and did this. But burning out along these polygon areas and modeling that those areas would be unburnable. But you turn on spotting, and you can see there's a very high spotting potential in this area, and tendencies for the fire to spot across the line, enter into receptive fuels, and keep on going until it hits the coast. But then I modeled, okay, thinking about backburning, I modeled burning out, and some of these on the landscape I used where it looked like they'd burned out before. I got in and some discussions with the fire suppression specialists about how extensive were the burnouts, where had they done it before, and you then just drew that on the landscape to see what that would look like, and simulated that they had burned out again using the same areas that they had burned out before. And these are probably basically some big areas, 4,000 feet, and that predominantly mitigated a lot of the spotting potential in this modeling space. But you can still see that one area in this particular section that I was looking at continued to have a area where suggested that there would be high ember production. And so then I started thinking about, okay, well, what could you do? And one of the things I was just showing here as an example is I modeled this as if they burnt out. So here's that hillside right here that it tended to produce embers. And then here are the receptive fuels on the other side of the fuel breaks. And I modeled this as if they had extended the burnout. There's just alternatives and places where they could start thinking about, where am I likely to get high potential for spot fires to occur? And then that kind of shows that this repeated modeling, game playing, if you will, can give you some examples of things that you could possibly use in the real world, or at least let you know that there's some high potentials. Experience is always part of it, but it really does seem like the fuel breaks are located in positions where they could be used to support fire suppression activities analysis. But if they're maintained, then it could save the government a lot of money.